Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Jerusalem Press Club's annual event marking International Holocaust Remembrance Day coming up this Friday. Today we'll take a break from our regular programming, which usually focuses on the intense Israeli and regional news cycle, to focus on an issue that rarely makes headlines but persists more than 70 years after humanity's greatest genocide. Our evening will be divided into two components. We will begin by addressing the matter of coverage of anti-Semitism at a time of increased polarization between communities in the West. Then we will discuss what can be done to improve awareness and who should be taking the lead. Finally, we will examine the various possibilities for dialogue and discourse in a changing diplomatic map ahead of the 3rd anniversary of the Abraham Accords. We will attempt to cover several continents in the short time that we have, so bear with us. Joining us live are two very special guests who have spent their lives studying the field and acting on behalf of the victims of the Holocaust. Dr. Efraim Zuroff, a published historian and the director of the Shimon Wiesenthal Center in Jerusalem. He's considered the #1 expert in the field of locating and bringing to justice Nazis across the globe. We also have Ambassador Colette Avital, who is chairperson of the Center Organization of Holocaust Survivors in Israel, Vice President of the Conference of Material Claims Against Germany, and Secretary General of the World Jewish Restitution Organization. A career diplomat and politician, including Israel's ambassador to Portugal, she served in a range of positions advancing Israel's foreign and defense policy, education, immigration, and other fields of society. Finally, addressing us in a pre-recorded message that will also serve as a basis of conversation for our final topic is His Excellency Ahmed Obaid AlMansoori, founder of the Crossroads of Civilizations Museum in Dubai, home of the Arab world's first Holocaust exhibition. He was a member of the United Arab Emirates Federal National Council and served in a number of committees and organizations at the federal level on industry, technology, education, Islamic affairs, and more. We are truly honored to have everyone participate in the program. So let us begin. We'll start now with Dr. Zuroff, if you may. I think my first question is, given your work on uncovering Holocaust distortion, if you think you can draw parallels between maybe modern day incidents whereby anti-Semitic attacks are misreported or perhaps even ignored in best case, or even covered up in the worst case. How do these relate maybe to your findings?
I think there is a similarity because, as you said, a lot of the anti-Semitic incidents are underreported. We also have to keep in mind that quite a few of them are not even submitted to the police, because there's this feeling in certain Jewish communities that the police won't respond. I think in New York City, there hasn't been a single person who's actually been convicted and punished for an anti-Semitic incident, and there have been plenty of them. And as for Holocaust distortion, this is something that unfortunately has been to a certain degree under the radar. And it's a very bad thing, because it's important to call out these governments who are manufacturing false narratives of the Shoah to hide their own crimes.
Okay, thank you for your answer. We'll turn over to you, Ambassador Avital. Do you think that anti-Semitic acts get enough coverage when they occur? And are there maybe areas we hear more about it, even though it could be just as extensive in other areas?
I have to say that I'm really not an expert about anti-Semitism. I thought that because of we're marking International Holocaust Day, we will try to speak about why it is done and exactly what is the purpose and what do we achieve or don't achieve through it. And I think that there is a connection, obviously. How the media covers anti-Semitic events is not my field of expertise. I think it is covered very much so, but I think that probably the social media have a very important role in promoting, as much as we are fond of democracy, and the social media have added to democracy. They have also enabled people to be able to come up and promote racism and antisemitism, and that is certainly one of our concerns. But with your permission, allow me really to try to connect it to why this International Holocaust Day is important. And it's not only because the Shoah, the genocide of the Jewish people, is unprecedented in Jewish history or in world history, because it was premeditated and planned and well organized by a government, which didn't happen out of the blue, and because what really preceded it were not only anti-Jewish laws, but a whole few, at least from 1933 on, a well-conducted indoctrination of the people. How can you explain, for instance, that a people as civilized as the Germans, who were really a light unto the nations and who actually had some of the best musicians and philosophers, fell into the trap and perpetrated? There were also perpetrators. And very few people actually did not participate. I mean, the German government, the Nazis could not have done what they've done without the acquiescence and the help of populations, not only in Germany, but everywhere. So I think that one has to remember, and I'm going back to what concerns you, and that is anti-Semitism. It would not have been, you cannot explain, and you couldn't have reached the point where Jews were exterminated as cockroaches unless that anti-Semitic and racial indoctrination was in place. And I think we have reason to concern today because some of these racist theories are spread in the world. And I think Dr. Zuroff rightly said that some of them pass under the radar, but we see what is happening in countries like Poland and Hungary and Russia and even Italy, where basically there's not exactly a denial of history, but a rewriting of history to embellish their history. And if the Poles will say to you, well, we have been the victims, maybe there's a grain of truth in that. The problem with distortion is that there is always an element of truth, and this is why it is so dangerous. But basically, what really is there is that, yes, they were the victims, but not only the victims, they were also the perpetrators. So I think that when we are looking at the world map today, and when you see in America groups that say that there's white supremacy, and when you see that there are neo-Nazi groups all around Europe, I think there is reason to concern. And we have to ask ourselves today, as we are marking the International Holocaust Day, what exactly has been learned and what has not been learned, and what can be done in order to be able to fight against this phenomena, which I think are worrisome not only for us, but for other nations too.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think now we're naturally segueing to the next section, which is what can be done. You mentioned social media as a platform for anti-Semitism, and of course we see also rampant Holocaust denial all over the networks, whether it's Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, otherwise. And I would like to get both of your opinions on this. Should regulators be doing more to prevent the spread of this, and how does this affect the thin line between freedom of speech and really the spread of disinformation that is dangerous at the end of the day? Dr. Zuroff, we'll go back to you before getting the ambassador's response.
Okay, so first of all, the problem is the following. How do you get a country to change its historical narrative? We assumed when these countries made the transition from dictatorship or communist dictatorships to Western democracies, and they wanted to enter the European Union and NATO because they needed their protection, obviously. There was a fear that the Russians would return, of course. We assumed that they would adopt the regular narrative that we know as far as the role of the perpetrators, who the perpetrators were, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not what happened. Instead, we got a totally false narrative that basically that acknowledged that the Holocaust had taken place, but terrible tragedy, the Germans came and they murdered our Jews. So, I mean, if you take a look at a country like Lithuania, where 96.4% of the Jews were murdered, 90% of them near their homes by shooting. And there were less than 1,000 Germans in Lithuania during the Nazi occupation. It's obvious that the Nazis had plenty of help. And you can go on. The Romanians didn't murder Jews. They murdered Jews, and how? Go look what happened in Odessa, for example. The Hungarians, the greatest crime was indeed the mass deportations to Auschwitz, but they murdered Jews in Kamenets-Podolsk, who were kicked out because they didn't have Hungarian citizenship. They murdered Jews in Novi Sad. They murdered Jews in Budapest after the Szálasi regime came to power, was installed Arrow Cross, which is the Hungarian fascists. So, you know, this is absolutely, first of all, unacceptable. But the question is how we would assume that the EU could do something about it. But even
Yes.
IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, doesn't, with all its efforts to combat Holocaust distortion, they have not found a way to convince these countries that they have to tell the truth.
Ambassador Avital, do you agree? Are there tools to perhaps encourage these countries to tell the truth, or are
Well,
we?
first of all, I would like to say something positive, and that is that there is a, how shall I, in French they say une prise de conscience. There is a will to combat anti-Semitism at the government level, whether it is each country that has appointed a special envoy and there are national plans, or whether it is at the level of the European Union. An effort is being made. People are, I've been in Romania a month ago, and by chance I was invited to participate in the interministerial forum. All the government ministries were represented there with plans how to work against anti-Semitism. And by the way, in Romania, and I'll come back to Romania because this is the country where I was born. In Romania, there is a law that now has made education, Holocaust education, compulsory in high schools. And I think that this is an important tool. I am much more for education at every level than any other tool and any other means. That is what I believe in. Without education from the lower level, there's nothing you can do afterwards. And working on the various platforms, yes, I think that there's a difference between freedom of speech and incitement. And this is basically, by the way, also apparent in the Israeli law. There are definitions of what incitement is all about. And I think that this is something which can be done in other countries too. Not that there is no incitement in Israel, not that there is no sometimes jokes about the Holocaust, which I don't like, in the name of freedom of speech, but there is a limit. And there are also positive things that can be done. Even though I'm older and I'm not one who has already taken part in the TikTok generation, things are done today on TikTok, films about Jews and Judaism, which are positive to combat anti-Semitism. So yes, I think there are tools, we have tools, and we have to be able to use them as much as possible, yes. And let me say just one word about Romania, because I think that what Dr. Zuroff said was very important, but perhaps not even enough about Romania. The Holocaust in Romania was much more Romania than was Nazi. They preceded the Nazis. They sent people on the trains, the death trains and the pogroms and so on before the Nazis even gave the orders or participated.
And what about the future of Israeli-Polish relations, as we see that following what happened with the, the previous government and decisions about legislation that go, in fact, in the opposite direction. Does Israel need to take its foreign policy considerations more seriously than its considerations for revealing the truth? What should be done at this point in time?
Who are you asking, Dr. Zuroff or me?
We'll continue with you, and then we'll go back to Dr. Zuroff.
Okay. I think that when the Polish law that forbade the freedom of speech and of research in Poland was enacted, and there was a common statement by the Prime Minister of Israel and the Prime Minister of Poland, that was something which I think was not useful, and it was far from being the right thing to do. I mean, it created a kind of symmetry. We suffered, you suffered, and didn't ask the Polish government to take its responsibility. And that law maybe was downgraded. It's not criminal anymore, but you still have to pay a fine, and it's there to intimidate free research. And I think that we are not speaking out enough about that. There are what you call raisons d'etat. There are state and government interests, and Israel needs Poland for its policies, for its support in the European Union. I am one who does not believe in that. I think that there are certain limits. I think that even though I worked in the Foreign Service for many, many, many years, and the raison d'etat is something that I have promoted, I think that there are limits to that. And I think that when it comes to the Jewish question and to the responsibility of people in the Holocaust, we should not keep quiet about that.
And Dr. Zuroff, what do you think? Do you think that Israel needs to become, the state of Israel needs to become more active in combating the distortion that you manage to reveal on a daily basis, or do we need to stay out of it?
It's no question that if Israel doesn't protest, these countries feel that they have a green light to do whatever they want. If Prime Minister Netanyahu goes to Lithuania and he praises them for the way they're commemorating the Shoah, I mean, that's like praising the Ku Klux Klan for improving race relations in America. This is absolutely mad. Now, he had a strategy, and he wanted to create a wedge between the Western European members of the EU who are obsessed with the Palestinians and the Eastern Europeans who couldn't care less. But it didn't necessarily work. We got a positive vote here and there. But if he comes and says that, I mean, they feel that they can say whatever they want. And believe me, they're nothing like lying about killing Jews. And they're experts in Lithuania, in Latvia, in Estonia, in Ukraine, in Romania, in Hungary, in Poland. That's the story.
Yeah. Well, in Romania, at least they combat against it. And I wouldn't put Romania in the same bag, but still, again, what we're talking about, Dr. Zuroff, unfortunately, is what we call realpolitik. And it's true that the strategy of the Prime Minister has been in the past and probably remains to draw a wedge between certain countries in Europe and the European Union in order to defend Israeli interests. And he has succeeded in that, because since the European Union has to take decisions or policy statements on a complete agreement basis, they don't do it because those countries oppose it. So that is the price that is being paid. Do I agree with it? No, I don't agree with it.
Okay,
Listen, I think
sorry, go ahead.
that there's a very sort of lopsided situation where when there's some advantage to be obtained by being the heirs of the 6 million, Israel runs to the head of the line. But when there's a responsibility to fill, they're not fulfilling that responsibility. And listen, I didn't come to Israel to live in a state that is going to, in a sense, do a misjustice to the memory of the victims. That's very, very terrible in my eyes. But I mean, there are ways of doing it. They don't have to do it in a very harsh way. They can tell these countries, most of which need us far more than we need them, little countries like the Baltic states, for example. Listen, we very much appreciate our friendship with you, and we want it to continue, but there's certain things that are simply unacceptable to us.
Yeah, but there's also a way of telling them, maybe even more softly, that it's not such a big tragedy to say, or it's not such a big, terrible thing to say that in the past, some of their people, not all of them, have committed crimes. But unless they take responsibility, unless they remember responsibly their past, there's no real education of the next generations. So if Germany has been, how shall I say, tough enough to look at its history and take responsibility, and nothing bad has happened to it, on the contrary, it is certainly respected among the nations. So can other nations also follow that example and say, okay, it took how many years did it take Zuroff for the Austrians to say, and finally, they did it. It took many years, but finally they were convinced to do it. And I think we also have to try not only by putting pressure, but also by explaining that nothing bad can happen to them. On the contrary, if they expect, and only good things can happen to them if they look at their history and take responsibility, because without taking responsibility, there is no future.
Listen, you're right. And many times I phrased it, presented it to people in these countries in that manner. In other words, it's to your benefit.
Credit, to your benefit, yeah.
To acknowledge your history. And you have to get out under this dark shadow that is interfering. You know, these countries are emptying out. When Lithuania entered the EU, when they got independence, they had 3.5 million people. Today they have less than 2.3 million people. Why are there so many people, young people, running away from there? This is part of the problem.
You think so? Maybe.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, maybe.
This is a very interesting part of the conversation. I do want to leave a little bit of time just to address our last issue, which is the opportunities ahead of us due to the changing diplomatic scene. With your permission, I'm just going to share Mr. Mansoori's address that he sent us earlier, and then we'll proceed to discuss it.
Let's start from the beginning. How did the idea of creating a Holocaust exhibition in Dubai come about?
The idea of the Holocaust gallery, there were a couple of triggers for it. We saw it was very important to first of all, to reintroduce the idea of the Holocaust and what happened in its correct and accurate way. And we had the opportunity, and also had the opportunity to having with me two of my Israeli colleagues used to work with me, and they were very helpful in creating and putting the artistic touches in it. And also, but before that, like a couple of months before that, the main trigger was the rise of anti-Semitism in other regions. The regions that I never expected that anti-Semitism will increase, and the hatred will increase. So I saw some images which were very disturbing, and before I thought it will never happen, But when I saw these images, and especially in certain continents which were supposed to be more civilized and more democratic, and then I realized, I was wrong. So that's why it was very important to introduce it and to send, the message to the world, that the Middle East is again, it's a place, it's a safe place. It should be away from all of these negativities. And thanks God, we never had such massacres. They were before wars and massacres, but on the war level, but not as such racist and in way of genocide level. So we think it's very important to reintroduce the idea of the Holocaust, what happened there in the region. Especially, there are many people either in denial or in refusal to talk about it. So it's an opportunity for that. And secondly, to learn from it, and to make sure that, send the right message that, when the Israelis and Arabs, they are working together peacefully, I think that so many miracles can happen. One of these miracles is to really contribute to the stability of the region, to change the game from zero-sum game to win-win game.
To what extent does the museum contribute to combat the rise of anti-Semitism and other forms of hate that have been seen around the Arab world in recent years, mainly on social media? Is there a different change of perception from the people that participate in the exhibition, or how do you perceive it?
From the beginning, when I mentioned, and I had the intention to mention that, we started the museum publicly from 2012. Before it was from 2006, 2011 in my house. It was a private museum. Then I made it public. I'm the owner, but it's made public from 2012. It was by invitation from the government because they love the concept. They said this reflects the culture of the country. They give me the best house in the historical area. So from beginning, we have items from the Jewish world. We have items from the Jews. We have things from whether personal or religious, and very beautiful artifacts we have there. And we have people come there to the museum. I notice when people come to the museum, if they leave their political hat, their judgmental hat, whatever hat outside, they get into the journey. Museums in the world, I think it's a universal thing. People respect museums. People respect facts. And everything there we have documented. So when people go there, when they see the fact, it's different. And honestly, the most people who get excited, about the Jewish items are the religious people, the Muslim religious people, because, there was a virtual wall before. Virtual wall, they have not seen it. And, deeply, I believe there's no hatred deeply. Whatever is happening is political. When people are politically led, and people were politically led by politicians, by their leaders, and negative things happen. And this from both sides. We hear many stereotypes from both sides. And that does not bother me personally, because I know this is natural. But deep inside, I know if we create the right platform for stability, if we can really contribute to the change of the game from zero-sum game to win-win game, at the strategy, the mentality of both nations, I think, we will go back to the golden age when the Jews and Arabs used to live together. At the time they were, Middle East was the shrine of knowledge, of religion, of principles, of values, which were contributing everywhere. So all of the main universal values came from our region. So I think that, it's not too late. We can do that one. And the peace between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, it's a very beautiful example. And our museum, from people to people, and also the Abrahamic family house in Abu Dhabi, these are only, catalyst projects to show the people, it is possible. Everybody can practice their religion. Everybody can be themselves next to each other and accept one another in a different way.
Dr. Zuroff, we'll begin with your response. A fellow historian whom I'm sure you know and admire, Bernard Lewis, argued that modern anti-Semitism in the Arab world was largely nurtured by anti-Semitism in Europe going back to the Middle Ages. Given your experience and everything that you've learned, do you believe that decades and perhaps centuries of indoctrination, that is a hatred of the Jews in this case, can this be reversed?
To be perfectly honest, you know what the Talmud says about prophecy after the destruction of the temple. It's only given to fools. So rather than be a fool, I'll admit that I really don't know. It's very hard for me to assess. And I haven't seen the museum in Dubai. It's in Dubai, right?
Yes, sir.
So I haven't been there, I haven't seen it, and I haven't had a chance to speak to the organizers and to learn more about what's going on over there.
Okay, I have a follow-up question for you that one of the participants is asking that has to do with your response to the social media question that we asked earlier, which I believe is also relevant to this part of the conversation when we're talking about the spread of anti-Semitism online. If you can maybe elaborate on that.
Social media, yeah.
So listen, social media is one of the causes of the incredible increase in anti-Semitic incidents. And the companies who should be doing the supervision have been very late in beginning to really supervise and take off harmful and anti-Semitic and hateful messages. So I know that our people in Los Angeles, in America, are in constant, continuous conversation with Facebook, with Twitter, with all these, these bodies. So there's some improvement, but as it is, it's basically flooded. That's the basic difference between the past and the present. That's what didn't exist in the past, and it has a tremendous presence today. And unfortunately, it's encouraging not only anti-Semitism, other forms of hatred, and other incidents like these shooting incidents in America. That's also part of it. People
Right.
go on Facebook, want to be famous, and then they kill people. It's absolutely nuts.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I will just emphasize for those of you who are writing, asking, the full video of Mr. Mansoori's address can be found on JPC's YouTube page, and we'll definitely share the link with you afterwards in the email for anybody who wants, as well as the chat box here. Going back to his remarks, Ambassador Avital, I would like to get your 2 cents, assuming that it takes longer for a substantial change to occur within societies in non-democratic regimes, following policy changes at the top. How optimistic are you that these long-term and these developments can be long-term and permanent, and not just a sign of temporary times?
First of all, let me say that I'm full of admiration for Mr. AlMansoori, for his courage. Look, the guy makes a private museum in his home in 2012. I mean, there's pioneering in that, and there's courage, and it's something outstanding. And today maybe it's easier, and today he has more support, but I think that this is very important. It really starts perking through. And I'd like to tell all of us, or to tell all of you, that there's an organization that in Paris by the name of Aladdin, who has been doing this kind of work for years in the Arab countries and in Iran. And it's also pioneering work. And I think that it perks through. It will take many years. It definitely is also a question of policy, because the Arab states wanted, or were the enemies of the state of Israel, or wanted the state of Israel to disappear. They also promoted anti-Semitism. It was a matter of policy, and there was a purpose in it. So it is very difficult. It was very difficult to combat it. I think that slowly and surely the Arab world has started opening to Israel. I'm listening carefully, and even if Saudi Arabia says we will continue to do business under the table with Israel, they say the word Israel. Remember years when the word Israel didn't exist on the maps. We didn't exist at all. So I think things are changing, and it will take many more years. But I don't think that anti-Semitism will disappear, neither there nor from the world. So it is a tremendous education. I think that, and I wish that many more would do that. I think it is going to improve, no doubt, and educate many people. But I think that anti-Semitism will continue to exist both in Europe and in the Arab world. It doesn't exist, by the way, in Asia, and it's very interesting. So one has to try to learn why and how come that it doesn't exist there, and why, for instance, the Chinese have such a tremendous admiration for the Jewish people and the Jewish mind, and they think that we are the most clever, while on the other side of the world, people say that we want to rule the world, and they're all the conspiration theories. So
Right.
I think
Some
something
people call it reverse anti-Semitism even.
Yeah.
This it doesn't, these diplomatic developments don't occur in a vacuum, and I think one follow-up question should be whether or not you think that Israel's political situation vis-a-vis the Palestinians can affect these warming ties. Like if something, if something extreme happens locally, whether it's, flaming up of the situation around Jerusalem or something like that, can we foresee maybe a change to this attempt at educating the Arab world against anti-Semitism, or these are two entirely separate issues?
Well, the Palestinian issue is not as central as it was in the past in the Arab world and in the Arab mind. And many of the Arab countries have learned slowly but surely that they have first to promote their own interests. And evidently, if they're Abraham Accords, it was not only for the love of Israel, definitely not. It was because of their own particular, maybe economic interests, maybe strategic interests. Vis-a-vis Iran and others. So I think those will be maintained. But do please remember that even though those agreements were signed, there are reservations about the Palestinian issue. And I'm afraid that if and when, and I hope this will not happen, things may flare up in the territories and with the territories or in Jerusalem, they will have their impact. I think that you've seen the reaction in Jordan immediately, and the trip of the prime minister there has not been in a vacuum. And therefore, unfortunately, and let's hope that this doesn't happen, but if there is another form of violence flaring up, it will have its impact on those agreements, and we will pay the price.
Very likely. We're running out of time. We have time for one more question, I think, before we move on to closing remarks. Dr. Zuroff, one journalist is asking, and I think it's in reference to perhaps to Ukraine, but he's saying that there's a claim that exists that while we, the Jews, Israel, have condemned the world for looking the other way during the Holocaust, while the Holocaust was happening, we in fact are doing the same. Not to compare the two events, but when something of this extent comes up, whether or not we should be more verbal, more active. This is the claim, and what are your remarks?
Well, I have to say that Ukraine is not one of my favorite countries, but they certainly deserve humanitarian assistance. And Israel has extended much humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, and done whatever she could within the parameters of the foreign policy situation. We have relations with the Russians, of course, and Russia is a key player in Syria, and it's something that very much affects Lebanon as well, and we have to be very careful. So, I mean, Zelensky said, we helped you in the Holocaust. Well, I would say I would say every Ukrainian who helped a Jew, I can find 100 who murdered Jews. So, listen, on both sides, they're lying, okay? Putin said he's going to invade Ukraine on February 24th to denazify the country. Ukraine is not a Nazi country. Okay, what is true is that the heroes of Ukraine, of modern Ukraine, independent Ukraine, were mass murderers. If it's Stefan Bandera, if it's Roman Shushkevich, both of the OUN, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, that's a fact, but that's not a sufficient reason to go and commit war crimes and kill civilians in Russia. On the other hand, when the Russians attacked Bocha, one of the suburbs of Kiev, so the speaker of the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, is already saying this is the Holocaust of the 21st century. So, I mean, here you see classic examples of distortion on both sides. And we have to be very careful in what we're doing. But I think I'm happy that we've supplied Ukraine with a lot of humanitarian help, that we've opened the doors to bring refugees from Ukraine. We've done what we can do.
Ambassador Avital, you definitely had a response there, so I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on it.
Well, there is a struggle between the heart and the mind. And there's a struggle between what we want to be, what we should be, and the realpolitik. And it's true, what Dr. Zuroff said is true. We could not get into a conflict with the Russians. This is the last thing that we should do. On the other hand, I'm sure that we could and should have done much, much more, certainly at the level of the public in Israel. The public was much more silent. Look at the public. I mean, something has changed if you look at the public reaction in Europe among the Germans and the Poles, etc., who really went out of their way to help. And true, we have gathered in Israel at least 500 Holocaust survivors from the Ukraine. We have enabled some to come in, but I think our policy at one point of the Ministry of Interior of not allowing more Ukrainian refugees into Israel was not something we should have done. That was something which I really condemned. So I think we could have done more in extending more help to the refugees, for instance.
Dr. Zuroff, any closing remarks that you'd like to give?
I'm hoping that the next Yom HaShoah situation will change and that there'll be improvements in terms of the willingness of these countries to tell the truth. And we're trying to do whatever we can to do that, like writing books and films and things of the sort. But only time will tell. You know, it's interesting because it took France 50 years for Chirac to accept responsibility for Vichy. So if it took France 50 years, France is a major country, a much stronger country than these little Baltic states and others. Maybe we have to wait 100 years. I don't know, but I won't be around by then.
Ambassador? No, I fully agree. And what I have to say is, number one, that we have to be able to put our minds together and combat anti-Semitism as much as we can and everywhere. But also, I think that we have to think much more today in terms of education. Certainly at high schools around the world, because memory is fading, because the last of the Holocaust survivors will not be around anymore to say, I was there. And therefore, since memory fades, and there's a lot of ignorance around the world, that encourages anti-Semitism, and therefore we should put many, many more efforts in education.
Okay, I think that's a good place to conclude. I'd like to thank both of you, Dr. Efraim Zuroff and Ambassador Colette Avital, for your time.
Thank you, Talia.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Matthias Sakal and Eli Klotzstein of the Jerusalem Press Club for facilitating this event, which we will continue to do every year, so as long as the problem persists. Good evening to everybody. We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.